I'm Indy Nidell. That's Spartacus Olson. That's Sebastian Brandstetter. This is another World War II in real time fireside chat, right?
Howdy.
Well,
folks.
We sit here next to the fireplace of wisdom, and he's going to shoot some questions at us about Second World War. We don't know what it's going to... Actually, I do know what this one's going to be, because this is part 2 of the one we did last time, right?
Yes.
It's about things that happened in North Africa at the end of 1940 and the beginning of 1941.
Correct.
Okay, now back to your regular programming. Now you can talk in a normal... I have no idea why I did that. I was just bored. But I did grow up in Texas, so...
It's authentic. So last time we left the North Africa with basically the Italian 10th Army being destroyed.
Right. And Operation Compass, yeah.
And Operation Compass being a success, and then Churchill prioritizing Greece.
So the British stopped the advance.
Exactly, British stopping the advance. And now what happens? The Germans come in.
The Germans.
The Germans have arrived.
Yeah, so they sent down an Africa Corps. They sent down Rommel. They do the order. He's informed on the 5th. They said, by the 11th or whatever, everything's happening. Yes, so that's where we are.
A lot faster than Hitler expected.
Yes.
And also a lot faster than...
What?
The Allies expected?
Oh, you mean the actual attacking or arriving?
Yes, I mean the actual attacking, yeah.
Well, had Wavell known that the Axis, the Italians or the Italians with German support or the Germans would be in any position to attack before May, he would not have sent so much force towards Greece. He did not think, after the crushing defeat the Italians had, that even with German reinforcement, he did not think that there would be in any position to attack towards Egypt until at least May, if not later. And this was not the case. Rommel went on the offensive as soon as he possibly could. And this, of course, did great because the British had not only stripped their forces, but they were also in a really dire state after the success of Operation Compass, because when you advance hundreds of kilometers in the desert, it's not good for your Matilda tanks and things like that.
And I mean, in the last Fireside Chat, you have to watch it as well. We talked a little about how at this point it's necessity more than a desire to intervene in North Africa from the German side.
Well, there's plenty in the German high command that's wanted this to happen.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. I mean, definitely Rader wanted it to happen. He wanted to secure the Mediterranean before Barbarossa. And Barbarossa has been already in the planning for months. Paulus did his war games in December. Forces were moved already last fall to places like Romania and stuff. And there's also command that does not want Hitler to send force down here at all. But we discussed this at the end of the last time. With the massive success of Operation Compass and the Italian failure in both Greece and North Africa, Mussolini's position in charge of Italy is threatened. And should Italy fall, that would be really bad for Hitler, and even worse, it was replaced with an Allied-friendly or democratic government of some sort.
And his attacks in both cases has opened the back door for the Allies to come into Europe through the Balkans.
Hitler does realize the importance of this. Now that you are committed to a Southern European war, because remember, none of Hitler's plans had anything to do with Southern Europe.
Yep.
Without Italy doing this would have remained a Northern European war, perhaps until the end of the war. But once he realizes the advantages of closing off the Mediterranean to the British, since sea line's not going to happen, Britain is not going to be easily defeated, marginalizing and minimalizing them then is one of the next best things. And of course, securing the Mediterranean would do that. That
is basically a very succinct synopsis of the last third of the last Fireside Chat.
All right. Well, still go and watch it though.
Yeah. But now you're up to date.
Okay.
So, as you already said, Rommel arrives, I think, on the 5th. He takes command.
Well, he gets the order the 5th. I don't remember the exact
Gets the order the 5th, then he arrives. Then the Germans just push back, right?
Right.
What is the British reaction? Are they just... Because, as you said, they didn't expect it at all.
Okay,
right?
Well, the British reaction amongst, of course, Wavell is surprised. And Wavell will soon enough lose his job and be sent over to India, and Auchinleck will take over and stuff. But Richard O'Connor, who was actually running Operation Compass, he's pissed off because he had wanted to push forward. It's February 8th that he gets the order to stop. How far could they have pushed forward is anybody's guess, but I don't think, personally, they were in good enough shape to push forward, all the way to Benghazi or something like that. I don't think they could have done that. But what do I know? I wasn't there. You know, O'Connor, he knew what his troops and what equipment he had. And certainly before the African Corps gets set up, it would basically be just a question of driving from point A to point B, since the Italians are not going to offer any meaningful defense, you know, until you start getting towards Tripoli and Tunisia.
And speaking about equipment, how do the German-Italian tanks or machinery hold up against the Commonwealth, their Commonwealth counterparts?
Well, I know I mentioned last time that at first Italy just had tankettes, and they had no anti-tank weapons that could really stop the British Matildas. The British Matildas would break down in the desert. That was their only real danger. So but of course, once the Germans arrived, they've got Mark IIIs, they've got some Mark IVs. They bring the 88 millimeter guns, which they use as anti-tank guns, which they use to devastating effect. The British have the cruiser tanks. Later on, there'll be American Grant tanks. There's advantages and disadvantages of everyone's armor by the time the Germans and the German armor arrive. I think the Germans have a slight edge because of the Mark IIIs and Mark IVs, but it's not a huge edge. And if you ask the chieftain, he might say completely the opposite. Because as he said, there's no such thing as having the best or worst tank. It's having the best or worst tank for the situation and the use. And I mean, those Italian tankettes, I'm sure there's situations where they're way better than a Mark III or a Mark IV. But the 88 millimeter guns make a huge difference.
So what happens is at the end of the day, the German arrival equalizes the equipment situation at least. And like he said, maybe puts an edge to the German side.
But there's doctrinal things that give a solid advantage to the Axis, because the Germans use their armor. They use combined arms, right? They combine infantry and armor and air and stuff, while the British and Commonwealth forces very jealously guard their independence, which is a negative thing. To not group these in a unified command and put it all together. Also, the Germans use the anti-tank weaponry and the 8 millimeter guns on offense. They don't use them as just defenses against tanks. They actually attack with them, and that's a big difference. So definitely, in terms of tactics and strategy, in the first few months after the Germans arrive, yes, the Germans have the advantage over the British.
I have another question. Earlier, you mentioned cruiser tanks.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just very quickly, what are cruiser tanks, what are infantry tanks, and how do they fit into the doctrinal difference?
I mean, certain tanks have stronger armor, and certain tanks have weaker armor but are more mobile. And obviously, since infantry is a bit slower than vehicles, you have tanks that work better with infantry are tanks that can take a lot of damage, and they might not be as fast and as maneuverable as tanks that have weaker armor but can get into position, can run ahead, can go behind. And sure, I mean, that's just a question every army has to deal with all of their armor.
Okay, so moving on to we already touched upon some of this, but I want to have it more concretely answered by these two wise men. Why was Rommel able to make such an immediate impact, and does Wavell bear all the responsibility for it?
Well, Rommel didn't do what anybody on both sides thought he was supposed to do. He wasn't supposed to go down there and launch an offensive and reach Egypt and reach Suez or anything like that. He was supposed to just go down there and bail the Italian position out from collapsing and prevent the British from reaching Tripoli, so that they could at least keep pumping strength into North Africa when they had the desire and the time to do so, and maybe beat the British at their leisure. And of course, with Wavell stripping force to Greece, Wavell didn't think he was going to attack either. So he confounded everybody. So that was certainly of the essence of his genius, is confounding everybody's predictions. It's a little unfair to Wavell because, yeah, Wavell was conservative in North Africa, which wasn't necessarily wrong, and he did strip the force there. But it was Churchill that said that the whole point was, though, that we are prioritizing supporting our Greek allies. Remember, Greece was Britain's last ally on mainland Europe.
Yeah.
They got thrown out of Norway, they got thrown out of England and France. Greece was it. And Churchill was going to make a very big show of not abandoning them by sending force. Now, Metaxas turned out to not want as much force as the British were willing to send. He had said max 100,000 men and not long-range planes that could bomb the Romanian oil fields because he didn't want to piss off Hitler, because he didn't want Hitler to invade, although Hitler had already decided he was going to do that, so it wouldn't have made a difference. But this was Churchill wants to make a big show of this. So who is Wavell to not go along with this?
One of the big reasons why Rommel makes such an impact really has to do with his personality and both his behavior and his capacity to act on that behavior. He's highly respected by his men. He's a commander that commands respect and authority and obedience. In difference to the Italians before that, who were completely disorganized, where there was no respect for the commanding officers among the mid-level officers, and it was a whole mess. Rommel comes in, he's got a really, really well working staff, he's got a well-working chain of command, and he knows what he wants to do, despite that he's been told to do something else. I don't think that was a surprise to Hitler. No. If it was, Hitler would have been blind, deaf, and stupid, which I don't think he was. He was almost blind, but he was not deaf and stupid. Rommel had already done something like this on a miniature scale in 1940 in France, where his dash for Paris famously saw him move ahead in front of everybody else to the point of where he had to fill up his tanks at gas stations
on the roadside, which you can't do in North Africa so much.
You can, but so this whole gung-ho attitude of charging ahead, that's very much in Rommel's personality. That's who he is. And then having a functioning chain of command the way he did enabled him, even in a difficult situation like North Africa, to actually carry out an operation that was very tight. And it was very tight. It wasn't tight like geographically, but it was tight in command. It was very, very tight.
There's another thing I wanted to talk about that we touched upon briefly last time, we talked about it last time, which is that after Operation Compass, the British find themselves in a situation that the Italians found themselves in previously, which is a very long and overstretched
although it's not quite as bad as the Italian supply lines, but yeah, you get the idea.
But
sure.
I'm sure that just adds to Rommel's early success.
Yes, but in difference to the Italians, the British, one, have better communication networks for themselves, and two, they have better intelligence networks. So the distance in the British defense line is not at all as bad as the distances in the Italian one. No. We talked about that before as well.
That's people on land in Egypt. They don't have to fly or sail in any reinforcements, possibly under enemy fire from enemy naval or
U-boats,
enemy aerial
whatever,
units.
yeah.
And the idea behind all defense lines here, it doesn't matter who you're talking about. If you're talking about Graziani or Rommel or Wavell, it's the same thing. You have huge amounts of land that you have to defend with not enough people and not enough equipment. So the way to do it is the way Wavell did it and the way Rommel did it, with organization. And it's not the way the Italians did it, with disorganization.
And with the British knowing all of the Italian codes and knowing all of their positions.
Absolutely.
Now I actually have a question for Sparty, which is usually the way it goes is that, the Wehrmacht goes somewhere and then they're followed by Einsatzgruppen or SS units. So why does that not happen in North Africa?
What does happen in North Africa? It just doesn't happen right away. The Einsatzgruppen do arrive. They just arrive later than, for instance, as we will see with Operation Barbarossa and as we saw in Poland already. The first time they're there is to meet with Rommel's guys to organize everything in July 1942, and then Walter Rauff with his Einsatzgruppen come in November 42, and this is really, really bad for the war at that point, because that's when a lot of atrocities happen. There's been a lot of debate back and forth. People have tried to kind of exercise some kind of division between Rommel and the Nazi Party and all of that. And this has been one of the examples they've taken, but that's really not true, because he was in on this plan from the very get-go. And the plan was to have the Einsatzgruppen come, but only when it made sense. What are the Einsatzgruppen going to do as long as they're fighting in the desert? They're not going to do much. It's when they arrive in areas like Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, and then of course potentially even British mandate in Palestine, that they have a real target, namely the Jews in North Africa. At this point in time, there's no real reason to have them there.
Not go straight into Rommel, because I want to talk about that in just a second on its own.
Sure.
Einsatzgruppen are there. They're coming later. But why is the Waffen-SS not in North Africa?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, they're not really necessary to have there because the Africa Corps has been set up in a way that they are sufficient for the deemed operations. There's another reason for it, and that is that the Waffen-SS is going to follow the ideological war. And that means Barbarossa.
Yeah.
They're already setting up very much for
You're
that.
sending millions of guys there as opposed to thousands of guys.
Then there's another part of it. The Waffen-SS is a fairly new organization at this point. People think of the Waffen-SS as something that goes back into the beginning of Nazism in the beginning of the 1930s. That's not true at all. It was created specifically because Himmler wanted to have his own army, and Theodor Eicke, who had founded the Totenkopfverbände, which were taking care of the concentration camps and were the main perpetrators of the Holocaust, Theodor Eicke wanted to have command over a force on the battlefield. This is why they are created. So they come into play the first time really in battle, although they are deployed in Poland in 1939 because they're created in December, but that's really only in sweeping up actions. The first time they go into actual action is in May in France and Belgium and the Benelux.
Okay.
And so they're a new force. Then there's a third reason. And the third reason is the actual divide between the Wehrmacht and the SS. You have to realize that the SS is not part of the Wehrmacht. The Waffen-SS is a separate organization. They do not report to OKH and OKW. They report to Himmler.
And they compete for resources too.
So they will, at a future point in time, actually start coordinating more than they did in France, and that they are at this point. But at this point, it's really Himmler's forces. Now, Himmler and Rommel are not the best of friends. So you're not going to get Himmler volunteering his forces to go help Rommel. That has nothing to do with being more or less Nazi than the other. It's just the normal conflict between high-ranking officers of the Nazi hierarchy.
But it's funny how the animosity between them goes back to it was in high school, but when they were like 17 and they played on the same volleyball team. That's when the animosity between Himmler and Rommel.
Yeah,
Don't make me laugh.
Himmler never got
You're
over.
making me laugh.
When I'm altering history, you should allow me to do it.
Himmler never got over.
Rommel was really good at volleyball.
Yeah, but
Himmler was never.
And that really irked Himmler because Himmler was a little bit taller than Rommel, so it was
But that's the way that is the way these things happen.
Going towards Rommel and away from the funny stuff.
Himmler. Volleyball.
How complicit was Rommel in the persecution of Jewish individuals in North Africa?
So, spoilers. We're going to get back to that when we get to the end of the African campaign, and you're going to see, like I said earlier, Walter Rauff arrives, and there's a lot of stuff going on where Rommel's involved. But let me try to take a more general view of this. Rommel was not a Nazi Party member, and that has been used very much to try to exonerate him from any complicity with the Nazi regime. But that's just not, that doesn't really gel with reality. He was one of Hitler's best friends. Hitler was a huge admirer of Rommel. Rommel was a huge admirer of Hitler. So you can't admire Hitler without being complicit in the ideas that Hitler stands for, and they include anti-Semitism to a genocidal level. So whatever Rommel did personally, whatever he did directly, he was definitely supportive of what the Nazis were doing, because otherwise he wouldn't be where he was. He wouldn't have risen to that point. And actually, if you look at it from that viewpoint, and that goes back to the whole clean Wehrmacht myth and everything, there's not a Wehrmacht general that you can find within the forces that wasn't either complicit with the Nazi regime or documented as opposing it, and most often disposed of. Yes. So the fact that he only is forced to commit suicide after the failed 20th of July plot 1944 indicates that at least up until that point or shortly before it, Rommel was a Nazi supporter. And that means that he was also an anti-Semitic genocidal supporter.
Often, the North Africa campaign is presented as a load of Europeans riding around in the desert, shooting at each other. But what's it look like for the natives, Libyans, Egyptians in the region? Did they have an impact on the war? Did they serve in troops?
Well, they had an impact on them. The Italians march in, the Italians march out, the British march in, the British march out, Germans march in, the Germans march out, and everybody local people get killed, they get their houses destroyed, they get stuff requisitioned from them, they get used as slave labor, they might end up being dragooned into some fight somewhere. Of course, it wrecks their lives just as it did in every other theater of this battle.
I think this is partly a media misconception and a funny one, because it's not a media misconception because of films. This is a media misconception partly due to the show, the actual newsreels. Okay. Because when you look at the newsreels from the North African campaign, all you see is desert, and you see are soldiers.
Bunch of white European guys.
You see a bunch of white European guys. You don't see a lot of urban warfare. But it was there.
It was certainly there.
I mean,
certainly when you get to
we're not there yet. But when we get to Tobruk and stuff like that,
and Cyrenaica is a bit more populated, and that's it.
It was horrible. It really was. And there's also another thing that I think is hard to grasp until you've really been to North Africa and seen how things work there. Still to this day in the 21st century, this is a nomadic culture. Everything works by trade. Everything works by people moving around from one place to another. You actually can't survive in this environment if you are not exercising trade, right? If you're not moving from, you won't. It's just simple things like you won't get water if you don't go get it, right? And now we have a war going on where there are a lot of crazy Europeans out there.
And by a lot, this isn't just thousands of men fighting. This is hundreds of thousands of men fighting.
Yeah.
That need food and water from hundreds of thousands of locals.
So now we suddenly have a situation where they are standing in the way for the actual functioning system of logistics that keeps people alive, number one. Number two, they're actually taking those resources because they need them to be able to fight. And now you have a perfect storm where people die of starvation.
It was horrible for them.
It's so easy to forget just because you don't see them in the pictures.
Yeah.
But they were there and they were dying and it was not fun.
As war never is.
And war never is. Well, you said that was where we were going to wrap it up?
And that's what we shall do.
Okay, well, that was a nice part 2 to North Africa. Don't tell us what the next one of these is, but I'm sure there'll be another one. And keep your eyes peeled for soon enough will be that 10-part, 10-week series. Each episode covers one day of the Sedan breakthrough and stuff that Rommel was very much involved in. It's going to be a really cool series. It's going to be very groundbreaking and very deep series.
Some myth busting.
Yeah, but also really, really cool stuff. We're working with some local historians who've been digging into all the events for the last 30 years. So the minutiae are really, really interesting. And that, and this, and everything we do is, of course, brought to you by the Time Ghost Army. So join the Time Ghost Army to make us happy so that we can keep doing more of this. And do not forget to subscribe. And we will all see you next time. Excelsior!